and welcome to the Keyboard Chronicles, a podcast for keyboard players. I'm your host, David Holloway, and I'm here with a really dodgy voice with you today, but I'm still thrilled to be here. And I'm also super thrilled to have Mr. Paul Bindig back in the fold. How are you, sir?
David, I'm excited to be back. Thanks for having me and inviting me back to be part of the podcast once again.
Always a pleasure. And I tell you what was a pleasure, and that was spending the last sort of hour or so talking to Mr. Glenn Sarangapany, who is an amazing keyboard player with a band, Birds of Tokyo. And in addition to that, he runs his own production studio and a whole lot more. So Glenn is based out of Western Australia. We've long wanted to speak with him, and it was absolutely a buzz to talk to him, wasn't it, Paul?
Yeah, it really was. And it was pretty inspirational. I was lucky enough, and we refer to this in the episode, I was lucky enough to watch him and his band play in front of 50,000 people on New Year's Eve at a cricket stadium the other night, and they were great, supported by a massive light show, but I'll leave it there because we talk about it in the interview.
Yeah, let's wait for the real fireworks, which is the interview, so we'll let you jump into that now. Glenn, how are you? It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, sir. We were just talking before we were recording. It's a balmy day in Western Australia today.
Yes, we've hit 31 degrees, so everyone's like putting on jumpers and being terrified that the water might fall out of the sky.
And just for our overseas listeners, that's Celsius, guys. WA is one hot state this time of year. So, it's lovely to have you here. We're thrilled to speak with you. So I thought we'd kick off just with a little bit about your past year or so. I know you're always busy with the sort of multiple hats you wear, but just tell us about what the last year's been like for you.
It's been pretty epic, actually. Like very good year. Birds just released a single called Starlight, which is great. That's been getting a bunch of airplay. We've played it for the first few times, and one of the very first early performances was at the Big Bash at Adelaide. So we got to play to an entire stadium with fireworks as the backdrop. So it's been a nice way to kick off a single.
And I know, so I do want to talk a little bit about that, and we will get onto that. So you've got an even bigger year coming ahead, but I thought we'd initially dive back to your musical upbringing. So what got you into music in the first place? Talk about those childhood into teen years and developing sort of your skills as a musician.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Because I trained as a guitarist when I was in going through university, and all through high school, I was just like guitar and nothing else. But absolute first love was hearing that Bugs Bunny episode where he plays Litz. He plays Hungarian Rhapsody. And I was obsessed with it. And as a 4-year-old kid, I was convinced that I could learn it just by listening to it and sitting down at the piano. And of course, I'd sit there and eventually get the ding, ding, kind of notes. And that to me was the greatest moment of music. I've been hooked ever since, from getting the first little thing and hearing a noise come out from a piano. Nothing else has ever been better. I don't think anything will ever excite me in the same way as hearing that. The piano's, in particular, classical piano has been my first love for music, even though it's not something that I'm particularly good at, knowing some of the people who are at that level, but it's something that I've always aspired to and always enjoy playing.
So Glenn, from that initial love, hearing Bugs Bunny and the piano sounds, talk us through your formative years coming through school. Were you studying music? Was music something you were always going to do as a career, or did it just happen? What was that like for you?
Well, as you can imagine, a 4-year-old, hitting the first few bits of the piano, you're heap stoked. You're oh, that's amazing. And then your parents get you to actually practice scales and stuff. And you're like, this is dreadful. So this is the worst thing of all time. I'm stuck with it. And as you're learning more and more pieces, you're kind of okay, cool. This is all right. And then in high school, my dad, gave me a guitar. And the piano disappeared for a long time after. It was this is amazing. This is so much easier. Just play a chord and I immediately sound like Nirvana. This is wicked. But the piano disappeared for quite a while, and there was nothing but multiple distortion pedals and going all through high school. I'd kind of piano was still the secondary instrument that I was doing, but when I was doing music, it was a lot of I just want to be in a band now. Being in a band is the coolest thing of all time. The first gig me and my mates ever went to was Jebediah, really, really great WA band here, and like seeing them at the university, we were just in awe. It was just like I can't imagine wanting to do anything else in the world. It's like playing on stage would be the greatest thing ever. And yeah, like since then it's kind of just been a progression to play in bands in any capacity, jazz bands, funk bands, orchestras, like rock bands in particular, in any way, shape or form that I could, all through high school and university. It was just like, it was just going more and more in that way.
Prompted me on something, Glenn, I hadn't planned on asking, and sorry about this, Paul, but WA, well and truly, so Western Australia for our non-Australian listeners, punches above its weight as far as those bands. You mentioned Jebediah, and just in the rock sphere alone, my favourite band of all time is the Triffids, WA band. What do you think it is about WA and the music scene there that's generated so many amazing acts, obviously including Birds of Tokyo?
Well, we just had nothing else to do here. Like, it was like, if you go anywhere else, you can go to pubs and stuff like that. Here, it's just like you hang with your mates and play music over and over again. That was the best part of the week. And that was all anyone did. And I think that got like really exacerbated later on by the fact that everyone was playing in everyone's bands. So like Adam Weston, who got me into Birds, him and I were playing in like a Led Zeppelin-y sounding band, and he used to come and fill in for my funk band at the time. And like if you did a chart of like who was playing in what band, it was just like a big mess. So you were just at every single gig, and you'd listen to other people and go, oh man, that's a really cool thing they've done. That's something super cool that I'm going to start doing that. The other weird thing was, because I ended up moving to Sydney later on, but in UA, in Perth, like you kind of really got to practice playing shows a lot with almost no one there except for your mates. So you just were playing like week in, week out, like trying to figure out, oh, cool, these songs kind of work, these ones don't work, this kind of thing does. There's a lot of cutting your teeth, I guess, like on a very empty kind of empty stages. I have noticed doesn't really exist in a lot of other states.
I think Western Australia too has that amazing performing arts academy, the Whopper, which I think a lot of musicians are alumni of that. Glenn, are you a graduate of that school or worked with people from there, I imagine?
Yes, I did on the jazz guitar course through there. Absolutely loved it. And like it was just a way to be practicing nonstop. Like every day you'd wake up and say, this is what I'm learning to do, while all your mates were, like learning to actually do sensible things like law and medicine, like learning different kinds of scales. It was sick fun. It was a really good time. Like I've definitely not experienced like that level of just being on the instruments and having to be surrounded by players of like that caliber for a long, long time.
You were talking about the various bands and projects, and you were saying it's like everyone sort of knows everyone and plays in each other's bands and that sort of thing. Our Australian listeners and viewers will know you from the Birds of Tokyo, who for our non-Australian listeners and viewers, and some of you will have heard of them too. They're a massive band here and still are in Australia, very popular, very good band. But I'm interested in your timeline of getting into that band. So you mentioned you were sort of invited to play through your network, but maybe talk us through some of you said you were keen to get in bands. What bands were you playing in, and what was that timeline like for you?
So as soon as I think it was in maybe like year 10, year 11, we started like going, okay, cool, let's start putting bands together and doing it. And a bunch of us just did the classic thing of like, can you do an instrument? Like, I think I've got a drum kit somewhere in my house. Like, if you come and hit it, I'll make a loud noise as well. And that would be brilliant. And like a bunch of us would kind of get together and do that. And then I think by the time we were in year 12, we had like 7 of us playing in a funk band with it was like, horn section and like 2 guitars, that kind of thing. I just wanted to be Prince at that stage. And it was just like, so like every song had like a 15-minute guitar solo and then a horn section just talking about being funky, which was the greatest thing ever. And there weren't a huge number of like funk bands or anything in Perth. So we kind of like, anytime someone wanted a dancey band, they would get us to come along and play, because then you would just be like, yeah, cool, these guys will play. Everyone will get up and dance and do that kind of thing. Of course, in year 12, I made the horrible mistake of getting that band tattooed on my arm. And as you can see, it's not a circle. They did an incredibly bad job of doing that. It's an egg shape that has popped up in my arm. So that's a lesson learned. But through that, through I kind of like ended up playing in a bunch of other bands. Like, a lot of my mates were at uni, so I was kind of, as you go to a gig, everyone's like, "Oh, do you want to sit in on keys for my other band?" There just didn't seem to be no keyboard players anyway. So I'd jump in, do a bit of jamming, and then as soon as someone goes, "Oh, hang on, he can just jump in, sit in on keys," you get another gig, and then there's like a session gig of playing through. I think one of the other guys I started off playing with was a band called the Wild Trees. Like, they were like a I'd say like nearly bluesy kind of little band. And then I played guitar for a band that ended up moving to Sydney called the Dirty Secrets, and they had a couple of pretty big songs for a little while. And like at that time, I was like touring quite a bit, and I'd kind of like said, look, it's not really the right fit for me. Adam Weston, drummer, I was playing in another band with him. He's like, "Oh, if you seem to have any spare time, I've got this other band called Birds of Tokyo, which is the singer from Carnival." I was like, "The singer from Wool? Like, oh man, amazing!" Like, checked out a bunch of their tracks, and they got me into a rehearsal before their first tour. The timings didn't quite work out. So as soon as I left Dirty Secrets, kind of just like moved into the Birds world. In fact, I think my second gig with Birds was at the Big Day Out in Perth, and I had to run from one stage with the Dirty Secrets straight to the next one to get both playing times in. Wow. I hadn't checked the schedule before we looked at it, and I just told everyone I could do it. I was like, "Yeah, no, it'll be fine, like absolutely fine." I was like, "Oh, so that is pretty close."
Wow. Yeah, that's a pleasant problem to have, but yeah, that's amazing. Also, let's talk about that then, Glenn. So, because my understanding is you'd done a little bit of session work with Birds before you obviously became a full-fledged member?
Yeah, so I was playing, like they just needed a touring keyboard player, same as like basically what everyone else was doing. So I jumped in for a couple of rehearsals, and they were like, "Yeah, cool, this is working. We've got a couple of things. It's filling out the sound nicely." Like, absolutely spin out to go on like the first tours and like do that stuff. Like, a lot of the touring party at the time, like our lighting guy, myself, and it was our first like national tours. So we were green as all hell. I had no idea what was going on. And yeah, then the guys started involving me more and more in the songwriting. Like, like I came up with a few keyboard parts for the Universes album, and it was like, oh, it's cool. And then they'd take me around. They took me to LA for the mixing of the album, which they absolutely did not to do, but they didn't need to do. But they're just legends. They're like, "Look, come along. You played some parts on the thing. Like, you might as well do the thing." So it was nice to be like, for them to have invited me into the group in that way. Like, and like at the time, you remember that these dudes were like my absolute heroes. Sparky was just like one of the best producers in the state, and Kenny's just an amazing singer, and the other two guys were just phenomenal players. It was such an honor to be part of it, and it just kind of kept growing from there. They kept involving me like more and more. So they were inviting me to the songwriting days for when everything was there, and like I'd come and sit in, like, add a few little parts and things like that. By the time we tracked stuff in Gothenburg for the self-titled album, it was like it was kind of like a full-time job by that stage. So it wasn't quite in the band yet, but I was always there as one extra person.
Glenn, just listening to you talk about starting out touring, and particularly touring Australia, I'm interested in your insights about touring from Perth around Australia. And to provide some context to our listeners and viewers who don't know Australian geography well, Perth is a very isolated part of Australia. It's a big capital city, but I live in the next nearest capital city to it, which is Adelaide, and that is 2,600 kilometres away from Perth, or 1,600 miles away. So to launch a touring project around Australia from Perth is a big undertaking and an expensive undertaking. And I'm fascinated about those initial tours, Glenn, and what you guys learned and what worked well and what didn't.
Yeah, it was rough touring. It was definitely not like what it was today. But we were all in our 20s, and like the idea of rough touring was nearly more fun than the luxury style of things. Like, everyone was sleeping on couches. Everyone was like doing anything they can to make the run work. And it was just so exciting because, like, if you're in WA at the time, you'd play like a tour would be driving a couple of hours to a place called Bunbury and doing a show there, and then driving another hour to a place called Dunsborough and doing a show there, and then another hour to Margaret River. And that was the tour. Like, that was the thing. I mean, we were under the impression you'd made it at that point. And then of like being able to go over to this place called Sydney and this other place called Melbourne, which as far as I was concerned was the opposite end of the earth, was incredible. So anything we had to do at the time was like a lot of people, like in the same hotel room, sleeping on the floor, trying to do stuff and just getting everything together. And at the same time, because everyone's at that age, like any kind of show fees you get or like a per diem, going to the casino and gambling and putting it on red. It's like, that's the end of that. So I'd like to say we were playing things smart, but it's just like, no, absolutely not. No, we learned very little from that time other than it was good to end up getting management to look after us and things to work out a little bit better.
I think, Glenn, that's what you call a potentially high risk versus high return strategy, putting all your fees on red.
Yeah, it's statistically not the wisest thing to do, but the terrifying the enjoyment we all had of watching our friends lose their money. It's like, well, you can't eat tomorrow.
And in the midst of all that, Glenn, I mean, you mentioned that you're initially a touring keyboardist and you obviously had to learn the Birds of Tokyo catalogue for what it was back then, and obviously it's grown substantially since then. I mean, really interested in your approach initially on how you would arrange the songs as a keyboard player, and then now that you're a writing partner, how that's changed for you. So you just approach to both preparing for a gig, but also recording songs now that you're involved.
Yeah, it's actually really funny, like, because I'd never considered that before, but because Birds was such a big part of like my keyboard playing phase, not the piano or the guitar playing phase, everything I've ever done has been molded to how Birds works and molded to these four guys that I play with. And so like all the performance parts, like the way synths play, the way Rhodes plays with the guitars and stuff like that, it's become just the most natural thing in the world. It's like that. I know how everything kind of locks in. The early on, there wasn't a huge amount of keyboard parts on the Day One album, which was the first time I went on tour with them. So they just wanted me to add like a little bit of stuff, play anything that wasn't there. And so that was like a pretty systematic approach of like, cool, I've got charts out, just write out like I'm in shorthand, like where everything is, get all my sounds dialed in, that was a really fun thing, a challenge that I'd never done, like, programming sounds for a keyboard. Being a classical piano player, it was just like, well, this is a whole new world. Getting all that those kind of bits and pieces in were kind of the way to do it, and the way I've done it has just been the way I do it now. Like I usually tend to have one bass piano that does like the piano sounds. And then one synth that changes from song to song depending on what's needed. So that'd be like mellotrons, string samples, like synthy parts like that. I used to travel with a third one, but now because I'm playing a lot more guitar, the third one's been moved in the rack. But that tends to be my normal setup and how I tend to go with just about any band. One bass keyboard that doesn't really change sounds, so just in case, like, I've just got it there and it feels like an 88 key piano that I understand how it works, and then a more synthy kind of thing that can be programmed is a lot more versatile.
Yeah, so I mean, that's probably a good juncture, Glenn, to talk about your rig with Birds of Tokyo. So I mean, are you using sort of a mix of virtual instruments via controllers? Yeah, what is your go-to when you are touring across these big distances? Backlining's variable. How are you sort of doing that?
We've just switched those. I've been using a Phantom or a 6 as my synth keyboard, which is just like, yeah. Roland just crushed it with that keyboard. Like, nothing is like, it's so good. Like it's light. You can do any sound. The sounds on it are better than my actual Juno.
Yeah.
And things like I absolutely froth it. And we've been just backlining the bottom pianos and the 88 key piano because it's been making sense. Like, usually there's, like the guys from Cat Empire or something will also be using one so we can just share it. But I've just bought a Phantom 08, which again is like insanely light. The keys sound great and everything. At least I know it's like consistent every single time. I haven't used a lot of virtual instruments for a while. Like we were using a lot of them like maybe 5-10 years ago, but the keyboards now are just sounding great, and they're so much easier to program. These, plus, like even if everything else dies with the computers, if you have an issue there, they're still working, so you can get through a thing. Just kind of compartmentalizing any kind of disaster areas.
Yeah, and we'll be looking forward to asking you about disasters a little bit later in the podcast, Glenn. It's one of our favourite things to ask about train wrecks. Before we get to that, you were talking before about you've got a methodology that works for you now around that the bass piano and then layering the synths on top to create different sounds and textures. Is there a general philosophy you have when you're creating and when you're writing? Birds is a pretty guitar heavy band and sound. So how are you staying out of the way of the guitar frequencies but still creating your own important synth lines to fill the sound out?
Birds, these days we normally tend to write just on the piano with vocals, and that's how the songs kind of get created. We'll sit there, and once they're in that form, everyone kind of has a good idea, and then we kind of tend to pull stuff out from there. The guitar parts that there's such a nice wall of sound that Sparky creates, not just with the sound of the guitar, but with the arrangements that he's making. And you kind of really want to let those shine for the orchestrations that they are. But then he's very conscious of hang on, we don't want this part to become to just be a wall guitar. He can kind of start hearing where he wants a mellotron or an organ or something like that to come in. So I usually take his lead as far as sonics go with that. He's a really, really good switched on producer, and we often work with Scott Borscroft, who is just mind-blowingly good. And these guys have a really good sense of okay, cool, we're leaving a bit of space here, we've got kind of things in there. I think my problem is that I still approach everything as a player rather than a studio songwriter guy. So anything you ask me to do, I'm way too excited to do it, and I have no capacity to be I don't know if this is good or bad. This is the most fun thing I'm playing. Do you want me to play more notes or less notes or anything? So it's kind of cool to have those guys to lean on when it comes to the sonic space of things. I put a lot of trust in them. Very often with Scott's approach with it will be he'll get me to layer a lot of stuff, big synth pads that cover the entire track and big bass lines, and then he'll just pull them in and out where he wants them to do with the track. He kind of performs using what I've given him. So I really wish I was better at it, in a lot of ways, being able to do it, but it's not really the sonic side of things is not really a skill that really locked in with me. I think I literally just get too excited about a melody.
Yeah.
And stuff. It's I'm sure we can squeeze in another part here. It's that's cool.
Love it. That's a positive attitude. I love it. But you raise a good point though, Glenn, as far as, in the recording studio, you have endless tracks, do as much as you want within the bounds of reason. So when you're translating that to a live show, how do you decide even the parts you have recorded on the album, which sort of get the prominence when you're playing live? And as you know, there's nothing wrong with supporting tracks and stuff as well. So how do you approach those more anthemic, orchestral's probably not the right word, but you know what I mean, pad-driven big songs?
That's a really good question. We used to have a really, really strict process about it. Early on, it was no, it's got to sound like the record and everything's got to be exactly perfect on. And we would spend ages getting everything from kick drum sounds to the low end bass, to the top end, to make sure all the guitars are exactly identically the same. And you kind of listen to it live and it sounds pretty different anyway because you're performing it live. And now we've kind of gone nearly in the opposite direction, not entirely, but we use what is really, really lifting the track as a live performance. So we've got a couple of things songs one called Unbreakable, where we've recorded a lot of strings, we've tried it multiple different ways, but just having the strings on track while the rest of us play acoustic guitar, piano, drums, and fill in things. It's the most vibey way of having it. It's if we could take 44 extra musicians on stage to play that one song, definitely would. But this seems like the next best option. So it's a lot of being really strategic with allowing the band to perform as much as possible and do as much as they can while still getting the essence of the songs, like in there. What you kind of want to hear is like, oh, cool, that drum loop in that bit was a really important part. That top string line was really, really important to get in there. So those ones are kind of ones we focus in on. The actual sounds though from the synths and stuff like that, because I tend to mainly use a Juno. Just about like all the sounds that's been on every bird sound. It's really easy to emulate it to an insane degree with the Phantom. So that one we've gotten very, very lucky with, where it's just like, cool, that's like we got a song called Anchor, and the sound I use live is almost identical to the sound on the record, which is great. But then the pianos and stuff like that are quite wildly different. Like the Good Lord piano is wildly different than the recording, but it's Good Lord.
I think the benefit of staying with Roland, right, the Phantoms, it's in that same lineage of the Juno, so you've got access to those very similar sounds, which is fantastic. You mentioned before your jazz guitar background and formal studies. Does that come into play at all when you're writing any of the stuff you learn from a jazz or classical background?
I think everything comes into play. Like jazz in particular for me was like the improvisational elements of it, and being able to know what the note sounds like before you play it. That was like the thing, like, so you're not like playing a note and guessing what it is. Like that element of it, like improvising in particular with Kenny, and when he's singing a melody and being able to move chords and like parts around, that came from the jazz world. It's not really in a jazz style as such, but it's like, that's how I kind of practiced doing that. And then the classical world, which is like basically where piano feels most natural to me, that's come into play so much with when we were doing the orchestral arrangements, and when Bird's played with the orchestras around the country and things like that. And that's been really, really useful, considering it's a skill that I kind of wanted to write off when my parents were making me learn how to play classical piano. But it's like, that's been incredibly, incredibly useful. Like to continuing on. Like I'd even say like it's bled into my songwriting more than like the pop rock kind of world and stuff like that.
And I think you're right. That whole idea of I know what it will sound like before I play it, it's got to be so helpful from a compositional and writing point of view. And even if you're getting yourself out of a jam live, which can happen to all of us, I think. Speaking of live, I wanted to reference back to something you mentioned earlier, Starlights, which you launched at the Adelaide Oval in front of a crowd of about 50,000 people, I would say. So to set the scene for those who don't know, this was a large cricket match on New Year's Eve, and so I was actually at this game, Glenn. So I saw this performance, and I was sitting there watching you play, and the Adelaide Oval has this amazing ability to do all sorts of cool lights and things. It's quite a modern setup, and I'm watching the band, and I'm thinking, gee, I reckon they haven't really done these guys a favour. There's not much in the way of pyrotechnics that's really supporting this. They could have, and then all of a sudden, these giant fireworks go off, and it's going bang and boom, and it was absolutely insane. So it was actually brilliant. It sounded great, and the light show was spectacular beyond belief. So my question is this: when you rehearsed or did your tech check, what was your understanding of? Did you realise these giant fireworks were going to be going off while you're in the middle of your songs? Because it was huge, and I must have. I don't know. I reckon I would have played a wrong note if that was me.
That was one of again, I was way too excited about that entire show, because we were sending out time code, which is when you're sending like a click track over to things. This is stuff that's like very new to me in the last couple of years, but you send out time code to the pyros and the lighting guys, so they know exactly, like, so they can code everything up and like cue things to the track, so everything's coming out at the same time. And there's been a bit back and forth about like how to do it, because we wanted that track to obviously have a bit of impact and where they were going to keep things mellow early on. I got shown a render by Mark, the guy who programmed everything during the sound check, and I lost my mind. Like, it was just like an image, like a 3D generated thing of like where everything was around the grounds, and knowing not only that we were going to be playing to that, but also that, because I start the tracks on stage, like when things start, that I could have caused ultimate mischief by like starting the middle of the chorus and just setting the fires off at any point. It was quite intoxicating feeling to have, but yeah, absolutely frothed on that. We were aware they were happening, but we didn't get to see them live until we actually performed, and everyone was, as you said, like as crazily excited about it as you could expect.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I do want to mention, I mean, Starlights is an amazing song, and it's called that for a reason, because it's a partnership with the Starlight Foundation, which is an absolutely brilliant children's charity. Just tell us about how that came about, because it does show that the more giving side of the band as well.
Yeah, it's like they're an amazing charity, and like it's been an absolute honor to be working with them. For this, we're so proud of the stuff that's come from it, and the stories the guys have had from going to visiting the hospital and like seeing the kids. It breaks your heart, and it just fills you with absolute joy, and it's really, really nice to be able to be involved with them. They've been extremely supportive, and and I think that vibe will continue going.
And I have to ask, Glenn, so I mean, again, amazing song, new song. I assume there's other stuff coming down the pipeline?
Yeah, we do have. We've actually got an entire writing trip set up. We're on tour as of 20th of Jan, and we've booked in time for the writing trip, and everyone's pumped. It's been a long time since we've put aside stuff. Adam, like Sparky's got so many ideas in the can right now that we're looking at. And every time he sends something through, like I'm just listening to it like 20 billion times just to get it's so exciting. It's pretty guitar heavy from the stuff that he's sent through, which again I'm very, very pumped about. I think it's gonna be a ripper. There's one track so far. There's always like in a bunch of work that you're doing, there's one that just won't go away and just stands out. There's one track right now that I'm so excited for everyone to hear.
We'll be excited to hear that too, as will all your fans. So that's it's good to know there's some new stuff coming out, and that you guys are excited for it. The energy we saw of you on stage the other night, you can see how into it everyone is, and that's very cool for everyone who loves birds. Now, I foreshadowed before, Glenn, that we would talk about disasters, train wrecks. We all have them. Regale us with a story of when things didn't go quite right for you on stage for whatever reason.
It's we played with, I think it was the Queensland Orchestra. We did a whole tour with all the orchestras around the country, and that's like super nerve-wracking to start off with, because you're playing on stage with musicians who are way better than you. It's like pin drop quiet, everyone's listening to, and like it's the hardest parts I'm playing on the piano. Like they're definitely the most challenging kind of things that I'm performing. And right as I'm about to walk on stage, like the orchestra's playing the overture at the start of it, the intro piece, and my in-ears pack, and the batteries have run out. Like they're just gone. There's nothing there at all. And this is as if Kenny and I are due to walk out on stage, and I'm supposed to start playing the intro of the piece. And I've just looked at Kenny, he's looked at me, and we've just gone, we just walked out. Luckily, one of the dudes was there, had to run around the other side of the stage, and he's just frantically yelling at the sound guys. So I just had to pull my ears out, play the entire start of Broken Bones, unable to hear anything. And as the orchestra kind of came in, just watching the conductors go like, okay, here we go. It was definitely one of the nothing else will scare me as much as that moment did. Now whenever I think about something that could possibly go wrong, it's just like, we got through that. Like, if you can play with an orchestra without being able to hear anything, well, like, what are you going to do?
You did well. Yeah, that's bone chilling. That really is. And I do want to ask, you mentioned about the orchestra and there being, in quotation marks, better players. I mean, you obviously got an amazing level of education yourself, but I think we all get a little bit intimidated by those classical musicians. What is the vibe when you're working with an orchestra? Obviously, everyone's human. Everyone wants to see each other succeed. Just how did you find those experiences overall?
That was the peak of music for me. Nothing was better. They were all really, they're really enthusiastic. They loved everything. The guy who arranged all the pieces, Nicholas Buck, is an absolute legend, and he's so used to working with rock bands, so he was able to cater to us and like any of our questions. Like we never felt out of place or anything like that, and everyone was incredible to work with. Like you said, like you're working with people who are like practicing on their instrument so much more than what we're doing. Like these, so like getting there and it's like just making sure you're kind of holding your own ground in your own little way. It was intimidating, but just an amazing experience. I don't know if I'll ever feel anything like that ever again musically.
And I know I've talked before on the show, and I'm not sure this was your first experience, Glenn, doing that, but people underestimate the power of an orchestra in full flight. Even coming from a rock band viewpoint, an orchestra in full flight is an amazing thing to be sitting in the middle of.
It's nuts. Like even when you just said that, like my heart started going, remembering it. Like you feel like the quiet to the loud, and like everything is like completely immersive and around you. I was listening to some of our songs with the lyrics that like Kenny and I had worked on for ages, and I was hearing them in new light with him singing them in that way. Yeah, like it was bringing tears to my eyes, like for the thing. Like, yeah, it was very, very overwhelming experience.
And speaking of immersive, Glenn, just for something different, you run your own production studio, Electric Sheep, where you have to create quite immersive work, and you do a lot of commercial sound design and other things. How's that? What did you have to learn to adapt to that? And also probably the other way, how has that work helped you in the band?
That has been a lot of fun. Like, to be honest, it's been a lot more of a business side learning than a music side learning kind of thing. I started the company just like as a side hustle for when Birds wasn't doing too much. And then we had a few tracks and people were like, oh, we really, really like what you guys are doing. They don't sound like traditional commercial tracks. It sounds more like stuff that's on the radio. Awesome. And from there, I started like realizing that instead of a lot of other companies, like they just kind of have like a couple of people on staff who like need to pretend that they are the best at writing every style of music. And I kind of went, if these guys are wanting that kind of thing, I can just reach out to people who I know are like, who if you want a drum and bass track, I know a guy who's actually who's a professional drum and bass, so he writes this stuff for real. If you want a hip hop track, I know someone who does that. And it started becoming that kind of thing where I just like started outsourcing to my friends so that everything was at like the absolute premium level. It's like it kind of got like a little bit kind of cool at and so yeah, so far people have been kind of noticing it and paying attention to it with the way it's been going. It's been it's been really fun like being involved with like learning like how to work to picture and working with commercials and the specs that are required. But yeah, overall I think it's been more of a learning how to do a business kind of thing rather than just being a musician.
And interested, are you seeing the impact of AI at this stage on the commercial side?
Yeah, very much so. A lot of directors are now using AI as their reference tracks rather than using demos, which is incredibly helpful for us. Like really, really good. It's a very interesting thing I'm curious to know where it's going to head, because the direction seems to be at some point, like, you won't need me to do stuff. Is there a realistic definition of it? And like, it's like right now, we've done a few blind tests of like testing an AI track versus a person, and people in general almost always go for the person still. It's not quite there, but give it another couple of weeks and let's see where we're at.
Yeah. I love how you said weeks. That's true though. You're right.
Man, I've been keeping up track of it, like, and like the difference between how they were like a year ago to what they're like now is incredible. They're still a little bit tough to work with once they've generated the full idea. It's like, can you change this chord of this bar? It's like, nah, yeah, I'm gonna just give you a whole new thing now.
That's right.
But I mean, surely that's just a matter of time before that's it's really, really exciting. I think unfortunately, if this was a movie about AI taking over the world, I'd be one of the bad guys. Maybe we learned a lesson later on, but I'm just way too excited about it at this point.
Yeah, I think at the moment it still is a really great augmentation tool, isn't it? And like you said, I think a track written by a real person, there's just something indefinably better about it. But there's no reason that AI can't help in terms of a reference. And I think when we see AI writing, it's a bit the same. It's pretty easy to pick up a sentence that ChatGPT has written, but I can help you get to something nice. So yeah, I'm fascinated by where it all goes too. And speaking of being fascinated about where things go, Glenn, we're going to ask you the question that all our guests hate, which is, you're trapped on a desert island. What are the 5 discs you must have, you could not live without?
5 discs, like as in CDs.
Yeah, albums. Yeah, just albums.
Yeah. It would be number 1 is definitely Blue Album by Weezer, the greatest album ever written. Just saw those guys at Good Things, and so it's still my favorite band of all time. Number 2, because I'm assuming I'm trapped on a desert island with my daughter, would have to be the K-pop Demon Hunters soundtrack. Because otherwise I wouldn't be able to get away with that. And also, that is an absolute banger of an album. Number 3 would be Nevermind. Nirvana, obviously, because sitting down and just learning all the drums to that. The number 4, I'd probably unfortunately go back to Green Album by Weezer.
Yeah.
Because, that also has a bunch of my favorite tracks on it. And then number 5, I think I'd go for something like, I think I'd go for International Super Hits by Green Day, the compilation one. I changed my mind. Because it's Desert Island, let's go for American Idiot. It's longer.
Yeah.
There's more stuff. I'll get bored of it, give them less.
Love it. No, great. And that's some of the quickest picks ever. You did well.
You did very well.
Good work. Now, Glenn, our last question is a 10-parter. We call it our quick fire 10. So 10 short and sharp answers to 10 fairly short questions. So the first one being, is due to some serious crime, you're sentenced to 6 months in a tribute band. What tribute are you choosing?
I've already answered this one. Weezer.
Yeah, true.
Or I could go for Blink 182. That'd be pretty
nice. Good. Love it.
Nice.
What's your most important pre-gig ritual? So what do you need to do to feel settled before a gig?
I have now gotten into the habit of getting to the side of stage before the rest of the band, and I have to mill about there and sing along with whatever music is being played. I don't know how that's happened, but that's it.
I think it's a common trait. I think it's keyboard players are some of the more organised. I know I'm always first to our gigs. If you hadn't been a musician, Glenn, what do you think your career choice would have been?
I have no idea. Absolutely no idea. I don't think I would have a career.
We'll leave it at that.
Professional kickboxer.
Nice. Are you a kickboxer by hobby?
No, I've done 6 classes this year, so I'm enjoying it right now. As that was the first thing popped into my head.
Right. Oh, so you probably just enjoy the idea of beating the snot out of someone, which I can absolutely relate to. Glenn, the favourite tour you've ever done?
Again, I've answered this one with it was the orchestral tour, and either one of those, the first ones where I had to fill in on guitar, or the second ones where the whole band was there, that was by far favourite tour ever.
Yeah, fantastic. And it may be part of this tour or not, the favourite gig you've ever done?
Definitely favourite gig ever was on the orchestral tour this time round, and in Melbourne. I think it was the second night of Hamer Hall, and it was incredible. I went home and bought the tiny guitar from Back to the Future. Fantastic.
Tell us about the first keyboard you ever owned, and do you still have it?
First keyboard I ever owned was the Juno 60 that I toured with Birds, and I've still got it. Like it is beaten up to hell. I'm so embarrassed to let any of the Roland reps know like what I did to it, because I used to pick it up and like hit it on a Rhodes. So I'm like, there's like bits falling part of it. It just sounds awful now, but I still got it.
That's funny. Love it. Name a newer artist, Glenn, that's inspiring you at the moment. Is there someone you've listened to recently you thought, I love their work?
So I don't know how new he is, but been listening to a lot of Benson Boone. One of the guys played a bunch of his tracks, and they're like, you have to check this out. Like it's like in my brain of the chord progressions and stuff like that. He's amazing. Yeah,
no, a good pick. If you had to play a whole show on just one keyboard, what would you choose, Glenn?
Any piano with a good piano sound. I can get away with it. The one of the Roland Phantoms, they're great.
And can you name one thing that you'd like to see invented that would make your life as a keyboard player easier?
Yes, a lighter flight case that looked after everything, because I'm still hitting 30 kilos. If I can get to under 23, I'd be very, very stoked. That would make my life a lot easier.
Yeah, and for our overseas listeners and viewers, 23 kilos is the magic number for checked baggage and overweight limits when you're touring around. So that's very important. We had a guest once, Glenn, say they wanted an anti-gravity case so that it would actually lighten the weight of the keyboard, which I think would be even better. There's a good idea. So the last question of our quick fire. Has
he tried doing the thing that everyone's tried of filling it up with balloons, helium balloons in the case?
That's a good idea.
Absolutely. So our last question of the quick fire 10 is, apart from maybe learning kickboxing, what's your favourite non-musical activity or hobby?
Man, this can be super cheesy, but it is literally just been hanging out with my daughter.
Yeah.
It has been the best. That's kind of a cheat because she still sings music all the time. She just got her first drum kit, so I'm still getting to do music, but that has been my favorite thing in the world.
And nothing cheesy about that. That's amazing. And look, amazing sums up your career today, Glenn. And I super excited to see what's still to come for you. We're certainly excited about the upcoming tour. I'm coming to see you at the Sydney show. Can't wait to see it. So can't thank you enough for your time. It's just been absolutely amazing.
Amazing. Look forward to meeting you in real life.
And there we have it. Paul, I'm glad you asked that question about the big performance on New Year's Eve. And it just sort of is a testament to how amazing these guys are and the level that they're still performing at.
Yeah, they really are, David, and I'm sure I speak for everyone who was at that performance. They sounded great. And Glenn was talking during the interview about they're not slavishly trying to recreate the album sound these days. They're happy to let the live version of what they do speak for itself. But I've got to tell you, it sounded fantastic what they did. So yeah, it was a great interview, and we love speaking to fellow Aussies, don't we, David? And hopefully all our overseas listeners and viewers were able to cope with our 3 accents.
Yes, there is always that. Yeah, look, for those of you overseas that haven't seen Birds of Tokyo perform or heard their albums, do yourself a favour and listen to them. They are some amazing anthemic, heartfelt songs. Even their well-known songs are truly iconic, but I love some of their less well-known ones. There's one called Photo by the Lake. Just love it. There's just, yeah, do yourself a favour, as Molly would have said. So, yeah, huge thanks again to Glenn. And do watch out for hopefully a rig tour down the track as well, because I'm excited to see them in a couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. In the meantime, again, thank you for listening. A big shout out to our gold and silver supporters, the amazing Tammy Catcher for Tammy's Musical Stew. Thank you, as always, Tammy, and hope you're keeping warm over there. Speaking of warm, the sunny land of Wales and Mr. Dewey Evans. I'm sure it's not real warm there either, mate. Not quite Canada level, but you know what we mean. So thank you for your support. The brilliant Mike at midnightmastering.com. I know, Paul, you've used Mike's services before and have been extremely happy, as have I. So do yourself a favour if you've got your own creations that you want mixed and mastered. Don't trust that nasty AI. Use Mike. And then last but not least, Dave Bryson, the team at the musicplayer.com forums. At the time of recording, we're just heading into the NAMM season over in LA. So all the big product announcements are happening sort of in the next couple of weeks. I know the musicplayer.com team will be there covering some of it. It is a great forum to jump on and check out. Once again, thanks to you. Thanks to you, Paul. And I know you're back again with us soon for another exciting guest. In the meantime, keep on playing.